Hi and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here and today is day 4 of my one sketch a day sketching challenge. Today I'm going to show you taking a painting from start to finish from the sketch. So this is my Pixabay reference photo. I'll be simplifying it. I'll leave the link to the Pixabay reference photograph in the description below. So here's my simplified sketch, and you can see it's literally just a few lines on the page. So the sketch here positions these apple trees in the orchard. You can see they're planted in rows, so I've considered perspective in the way that I've arranged my sketch, with the rows of apple trees sort of disappearing off into the vanishing point on the horizon. I have also made sure that my apple trees in my orchard look reasonably convincing in their shape as apple trees. And here is the next stage, which is the line work, which I've added to my pencil sketch. So I've added the darkest darks on the tree trunks and some of the branches for some nice shadows as well as outlines. But I've also left some gaps between the branches for blossom and a few leaves. One thing I love about spring tree blossom is it usually appears before the leaves, but the stage here is where there is a bit of blossom left and the new bright spring leaf growth is growing up around it. So that's what I'm looking to depict here. So the next stage is to use masking fluid, and I've painted that out. I've dotted it around the ends of the branches where I want my blossom and my emerging spring leaves. I've also dotted some around in the foreground, and that should just give us a really simple carpet of flowers and fallen blossom. Keeping this really simple, and here's the finished result. So this is what I'll be painting today. So I'm hoping that you can see it go from photo reference idea to sketch to line work and then to preparation for the painting by masking out some of the white areas to preserve them to make it much easier to paint. So I've laid my board at quite a narrow angle. I don't want the paint to run down the page too much today, so it's only about sort of 15-20 degrees. And I'm wetting my sky all over with a large mop brush. This is a size 18 Escoda Ultimo synthetic mop brush, and so I'm just simply wetting the sky. And then I'll mix up a very light value of quite watery raw sienna, just to take away from the white of the paper and start off that sort of summery glow. And this is, it's my homemade sky blue, but you can use cerulean blue, and sort of skimming it with the mop brush across the wet paper to give my sky a little bit of perspective, a little bit of movement. Everything will soften because I'm painting wet in wet. Now, just before I leave it to dry, I think you can see that I've got a slight amount of paint pooling up where I've got a little bit of dry paper and where I've got my masking fluid. So I'm taking a small mop brush, and it doesn't matter, any clean damp brush, and just touching it to the paint. The brush is what's known as a thirsty brush because it'll sort of soak up any little pools or puddles of paint that kind of accumulate around the masking fluid or on the horizon where the wet paint meets the dry paper. And now to get the orchard painted with a nice pale spring green. This is the cerulean blue or sky blue mixed with lemon yellow, plenty of water, keep it a nice light value, and paint it across below the horizon, and then add burnt sienna to warm it up and brighten it up to a mid-tone and bring it across underneath the closest trees. The trees, I hope you excuse me, noticed in the introduction I showed you, have shadows beneath them, and I think that's a lovely feature of this painting, of this photograph. So I want to include the shadows in my paintings. I'm going to try and get a little bit more dark, wet in wet, especially around the foreground and underneath those trees. And then lastly, we're going to just darken up the distant tree line, and for that I'm using a size 6 synthetic mop, again an Escoda Ultimo. And now just leave it to dry completely, and then we'll come back and continue and start painting in the trees. So here it is. You can see it's dried back a lot lighter, but we've got that nicely established, slightly darker tones in the foreground. So I'm going to remove the masking fluid on the trees. I'm going to leave the masking fluid on the flowers in the foreground though. I'm just going to remove it where I want my foliage on my trees and my tree blossom. I'm using what's called a rubber cement pickup by Graphics, I think, and it's like a sort of a piece of rubber that you can use to remove the masking fluid, but you can just rub it off with a clean damp finger or use the tacky side of a piece of masking tape to remove it. Then once you've removed it, just brush off any dry crumbs that are hanging around on the paper. And now to paint the little emerging spring leaves that are emerging around the apple blossom. As I said at the beginning, one of the beautiful things about tree blossom is the fact that the blossom comes out before the leaves. It's not there for long like that, but it looks really pretty. And then as the leaves grow up around the pretty blossom, it becomes even prettier. So I've used my cerulean blue to mix with lemon yellow for the paler blues in varying mixes, just adding a dab more blue or a dab more yellow depending on the green that I want. And I'm just using a small round brush with a good point or a calligraphy brush like mine here to dot in the foliage, making sure I leave plenty of the unpainted paper to represent the apple blossom showing through. Then adding burnt sienna and burnt umber to the green mix to warm it up and darken it down, and adding shadows and tones around the lower parts of the trees, but still leaving that lovely lacy tracery so you can see the sky through. And now to paint the shadows under the trees. So I'm using my Escoda Perla size 14 round brush with a good point, and I'm using my darkest green mix that's got a bit of burnt sienna and burnt umber in it, and I'm painting the shadows across beneath the trees, making sure that I get a sort of slightly larger, more defined shadow underneath these foreground trees. Just smudging it off with my finger. If I need to soften it, I can dab it off with a tissue if it gets sort of too dark in places. But all I want is just this hint of shadow under the trees, trying to adjust the size of the shadow underneath each tree as they disappear off into the distance. And reloading my brush with plenty of paint, and then coming in and painting a tree, a large foreground tree that's just out of shot, so to speak, but it's cast its shadow across the foreground, taking it off the tape and bringing it about 2/3 of the way across the field or the orchard. And I'm hoping you can see how these shadows getting smaller as the apple trees go back into the distance in this row here helps to emphasize the perspective and therefore the depth and the distance. And then the last thing to do at this stage is to just add a bit of water to the green so it's a lot paler, and then paint over the sort of tree line in the far distance on the horizon line, taking care to paint around the blossom so that it appears to be in the distance with the trees in front of it. And again, this helps to push these trees forward and gives us more depth and distance. So just take care doing this and make sure, as I say, that you paint around your blossom. And once you've done that, we're going to leave it to dry completely and then come back and we'll remove the masking fluid on the orchard in the foreground and paint in a few flowers. So it's nice and dry, and I'm using my rubber cement pickup again to remove the masking fluid, but rub it off with a clean finger or use the tacky side of a piece of masking tape. And then brush off any crumbs with a dry brush. And now I've mixed up some cad yellow, and I'm going to use the point of my brush and I'm going to touch it into the distant little clumps of flowers. And then just bring the paint across in horizontal lines as well around the flowers to keep them a little bit paler in the midground. Then as I come forward, I'm going to increase the intensity of my cad yellow and paint in nearly all of the flowers, maybe dandelions, buttercups, whatever they are, in the front, in the foreground. So those flowers are larger because they're closer to us, and hopefully they will just give us the impression of this little carpet of beautiful wild flowers surrounding this pretty orchard in springtime. And that's it. So here's the finished painting. So I'm hoping that you have seen how important it is to sort of practice your sketching, because it's the sketch here that underpins the rest of the painting. Without that sketch and the getting the perspective right for the depth and distance and the proportions, then this painting wouldn't work quite so well. So that's the end of day 4 of my sketching, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing this one progress. And if you're interested in a more in-depth tutorial for this, showing just about everything and discussing a few more things about it in more detail, then please pop over to my Patreon page following the link below. And there's a 2-part workshop, Wednesday workshop there with reference photograph to download, etc. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It's very exciting. We're nearly at 90,000 subscribers, so if you're not subscribed, please do consider doing it. It's free, and we really want to push forward and try and get to 100,000 as soon as we can. Thank you so much for your help. Thanks so much to everyone that supports us on Patreon. Thanks to all the new patrons, and you can support Morgana and myself by following the links below. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.